From the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., this is the Tyler's Place Podcast, a podcast by Scottish Rite Freemasons for all Freemasons wheresoever dispersed. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree, and as always, we're brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the world. Something different for the Tyler's Place Podcast in this episode, and it's something we hope to do a lot more of in the future. This is our first real collaboration with another podcaster. There are so many great Masonic podcasts out there, and I listen to so many of them, and we've been wanting to connect with some of our podcast brothers out there. So joining me now is Brother Michael Arce from the Craftsman Online Podcast. We had a really great conversation. You can hear part of the chat right here on the Tyler's Place Podcast, and you can hear the rest of our discussion as part of the Craftsman Online Podcast. It is linked in our description, so wherever you're listening, if you hit up the description, you can find it, or just simply search for Craftsman Online Podcast. It'll come right up. And if you're joining us from the Craftsman Online Podcast as one of their regular listeners, welcome and thank you so much. So glad to have you here. If you're a regular listener to the Tyler's Place Podcast, please make it a point to subscribe to the Craftsman Online Podcast. Wonderful group of brothers that put that together. Had so much fun talking with another Masonic podcaster. So let's get into the conversation with Brother Michael Arce.
I've actually never been really interviewed about our podcast, so this is a new.
Me neither. So we'll do it back and forth, and then that's how we'll do it. We'll do like you guys. How long have you been doing your podcast? It's been what, at least a year or so, isn't it?
So we're technically on season 3, but I don't think we started until 2021. We just kind of did half of that year, and then last year and this year. Yeah.
I always start with sort of the Masonic particulars. So give me your Masonic CV, if you will.
Sure. Just a brother Michael Arce. I'm a member of 2 jurisdictions. So in New York, my home lodge is Mount. Oh my gosh, I'm going to forget all these. It's been a while. Mount Vernon, number 3 in Albany, New York. And I'm also a member of Mount Zion, number 311 in Troy, New York. And then here in the nation's capital, I'm a member of St. John's, number 11, and the senior warden this year.
Congratulations. So
thanks.
You've got a great voice for podcasting. You've got the pipes for it. I do not.
Well, in a former life, I was actually did country radio. So
good deal.
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
Let's see. I grew up in Southwest Arizona, was in Tucson for a handful of years, Albany, New York for a handful of years, Salisbury, Ocean City, back to Albany, then retired.
Was that BOC down there?
No, it was Froggy. Froggy 99. Yep.
Oh yeah. I did radio in Baltimore and Washington for longer than I care to admit.
No, yeah. I never got to the major markets.
I was born into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did mornings in Baltimore from 93 until I guess when they kicked me out, 2013, Matt. So when my youngest was born.
So you came in and spent that big severance check long before 20.
Yeah, I worked for CBS Radio. I always say I was a survivor of CBS Radio. But when my youngest was born, my wife's an attorney, and the decision had to be made who stays home and who goes back to work. The lawyer goes back to work. The radio DJ stays home, and that's the end of it.
Mr. Mom, nice.
Yeah. So, and then, so what brought you to Freemasonry to begin with? What got you to knock on that door the first time?
Well, it's a interesting story. So the first part was my best friend in college, who was my best man when I got married. After we parted ways, he moved out to the East Coast and was in Rhode Island and got married. And his father-in-law there was a Freemason and got him into the craft. And he's like, dude, he called me. He's like, I think you'd really like this. Like, you like national treasures. You're into American history. I think you'd like the Freemasons. And I'm like, Freemasons? Like, what? And I was married at the time. And my wife at that point, we had, 2 small kids. She was pretty realistic about the time commitment. And I bought a book on Freemasonry. I read it. I'm like, who is this Hiram Abiff guy? Like, what's the story? Put that on a shelf. About 10 years went by. I was going through my divorce. I was going back to school for my undergrad, and I kept driving by a Masonic lodge in Schenectady, New York, where I was living. I was like, this has to be a sign. And that's what led me to knock on the door. No one in my family has ever been a Freemason, just a really close friend. And from there, I just was pursuing the light. Had no idea what I was getting into.
So what called you to get into the world of podcasting? Had you done, obviously you discussed radio, and it is a very natural extension for those of us who spend more time in front of a microphone than not.
Right. Honestly, it was something that I was trying to delay. We launched the Craftsman Online project during the height of the pandemic when I was in upstate New York. And the goal was to really try to, as many lodges and jurisdictions were at that time, trying to build a platform or a network where brothers could get together. I had this idea that once we started getting beyond my little part of the world in New York and downstate New York City, that this was going to catch fire and we were going to go across the country. There's no way it wasn't going to happen. My focus was originally to just generate blog content. I thought that was the way to go. And my business partner at the time was really the one who was kind of organizing the meetings that we were doing on Zoom with the speakers and just trying to keep brothers engaged. At a certain point, they're like, hey, we should get a podcast. And I'm like, you guys have no idea how work intensive this is. It's way harder than writing a blog article. It's a 52-week season, and you're sitting here starting out with an audience of 3 people, the host, a guest if you're lucky, and maybe just some guy who randomly found you on Apple Podcasts. And you start small and you continue to grow. So 3 seasons later, and we are really blessed with the support that we've had from brethren from all around the world now.
So in terms of putting topics and things together, how do you, a lot of guys will get way down the rabbit hole in some, there's a lot of Masonic podcasts. There's no shortage of them. Some of them are great and some of them are, guys are trying, and I certainly can appreciate anybody wanting to discuss it. But you guys seem to kind of run the middle of the road with some of that. Which I really appreciate, because I think that sometimes some of those rabbit holes are, wow, deep and dark.
Yeah. I think for that one, going back to the old radio adage that everybody has a story, right? And I'm just kind of interested in hearing what brothers are passionate about. I subscribe to the idea that Freemasonry can be found in anything in life, and in life, Freemasonry can be found. And whatever the passions are of these brothers, if it's interesting to me, I figure it might be interesting to somebody else. And sometimes the story isn't necessarily the subject matter or the topic that we're talking about, but really the brother and the pursuit that he's having and the interest that he's following to find a solution or just learn more about something. I'm also the guy that shows up to lodge meetings and likes speakers and programs and hearing a little bit about everything. I personally have had my own white rabbit that I chase around in Freemasonry. I'm a big point within a circle guy. I've talked about that a few times on our podcast. I'm mystified by the brothers. What's that?
Hands down, my favorite symbol. I talk about that one all the time myself.
Oh, yeah. It's the most ancient, most simplest, has so many different meanings. Every time I talk to somebody about it, I'm like, okay, so what does it mean to you? Because to me, it means like 5 or 6 things. And then I hear something new and I'm like, I never thought about that either. So what is it for you?
For me, it's a very practical symbol and a reminder of how to put the working tools to use. You can't draw the circle, the circumpunct. You can't draw the parallel lines. You can't create that symbol in its entirety without the square, the compasses, and the Holy Bible. You have to have those tools in order to draw that very symbol. And those tools are very specific in how they are used. I think that a set of compasses only works if one point stays attached to the center. So you can draw a pretty big circle as long as you keep one point of your compass attached to your center. So whatever your personal center is, for myself, it's it's my family, it's my lodge brothers there. It's Brother Matt here, the good friends I have in my life. They're that center that, as long as I'm kind of attached to that, I can go pretty broad in the world and do a lot of things. But I have to keep one point of my compasses attached to that, fixed to that center. You can't draw a good circle, otherwise it's just create cattywampus. And
right.
That's what it means to me. To me, it's a reminder that this is a practical art for self-improvement and self-government.
Okay. I dig that. I like that. It's kind of in line where I followed the ritual and tried to digest that and then reference it with all the great writers. And basically my takeaway is that, similar to yours, is that I think the point within a circle kind of represents the spectrum, the personality radius that we have. And this always gets a joke when I give the presentation in lodges, but some guys have bigger circles than others. And the center of our circle isn't always in the dead center. Sometimes we're close to the edge or maybe on the opposite side. And it's really just all about those relationships and just respecting people's personal space and staying within kind of the quote unquote friendly confines of our personality. And so, yeah, to me, it's the exemplification of the golden rule.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things. I think that often people, who was it that said, it was Bruce Lee that said, people get so whooped up about, they pay attention to the finger pointing to the moon rather than paying attention to the moon.
Right.
He may have swiped it from somewhere, but I think too often brothers, when they have discussions about the symbols of Masonry, they forget that they are supposed to have a meaning, and arguing about what that meaning is less important than putting that meaning to work in your life. So, I like to also point to the rough ashlar, the perfect ashlar, and the common gavel. We're trying to get from being that rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar, and you do that not with a sledgehammer. That's not that's not what we're taught in ritual. Ritual, we're given a common gavel, which is a small, fine instrument for making small changes. So we're not trying to hack a giant chunk of rock off to smooth out the stone. Little changes over time. And to me, that's the reminder that it's a practical art. And it's the history is interesting, but sometimes even, I know people give me a hard time for this. I think Albert Pike draws some conclusions and things. Is like, listen, man, you're out there where the buses don't run. I get what you're saying. Same time, really, I'm just trying to be less of a jerk tomorrow than I was today, and even better on Thursday than I was on Wednesday. That's really what I want for me. And while I enjoy learning the history and hearing these other perspectives, sometimes I'm like, man, you're just way out there.
Yeah. That's
a popular opinion for somebody. I get it, but
right. The few times that I've read Mackey or Pike or Manly P. Hall has really just been a focused effort on a couple paragraphs, maybe less than a chapter or so of their work, because to me, it's just so dense. And I have nothing but respect for brothers that really get into the esoteric part of that.
100%.
Man, they take you up to the clouds and space and back in time to the ancient Egyptian pyramids. And you're like, where did you get all of this from? The ritual that we all know and practice, but it just shows the different veins, just like, the guys that can get into the history of the world and start talking about things. And I'm like, you're getting all of that from how we take a candidate around a lot. Where did you get that from? Like, was I sleeping during all this? So I think the thing to answer your question is, when it comes to, content for a Masonic podcast, I actually am never stressed out about finding guests or topics, because it's just an endless stream of information that's out there. It's honestly, the toughest part is finding somebody that I can grab for an hour and getting them to commit to the time to, let's have this conversation and tell me what you know.
Yeah, I definitely can understand that. And so what was your, and this isn't the strange way to ask the question, but as a podcaster, Joe Rogan has obviously flipped the script on what podcasting has been. When I first started, I stuck with a radio mantra of keeping the conversation short. I did short segments. It was overproduced, probably. I'd talk to somebody for 5 minutes and then do another person. If you listen to the first probably 3 seasons of the Tyler's Place, you'll hear that at the end we did a little trivia game, and it was very much based on radio programming formatics and things like that. But then, Rogan comes along and is now, it's all long form, relaxed conversation that can, you can go in different directions and it's okay. And it has given a lot of freedom for the podcasting thing. When you sat down to create your podcast, did you have those old radio ideas in mind to start with, or did you want to focus more on the conversation and sort of the way that Rogan has changed the genre?
Yeah. I wish that we could do a podcast like Joe Rogan.
Yeah, 11 million people listening would be awesome.
Well, this is what we would do for our job. It would be fantastic. But I think the realistic part of it is that those conversations do happen. I think they happen in lodges after meetings between brethren. And I think if we were to try to do that on any kind of technology platform, we'd have to make sure that it's tiled. That's what's special about the Joe Rogan podcast, is that you're waiting for the guest to say that one thing where now we're talking about aliens or whatever the latest medicinal thing he's discovered. And we just have to be very guarded with our words when we talk about Freemasonry or the secrets of Freemasonry, knowing that we're going to have members of the profane tuning in, which is something that you kind of have to, when it comes to planning the podcast, is, okay, we're going to have a conversation about Freemasonry, but we can't give you everything about it. It's worse than when you try to read books, because they do the same thing and you're like, but what direction are you pointing us in? So I wish that we could do a Joe Rogan style. But with that said, I think this is the first podcast where I've probably talked the most ever. I know that just like in radio, people weren't tuning in for me. They were tuning in for the music or the artists or whatever the program was. And my job is to I know the guests. I have either been brothers with them sitting in lodge. I've just been fans or admiring their work. And my job is to make sure that the story that I know that is there is being shared to that wider audience. And so my job is to just ask the right questions to set them up and then just step back, literally shine that spotlight with enough room for me to get out of it so that everybody can hear what they have to say.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome approach, but it does leave a lot of questions for, where you're, I'm doing it now. I'm asking you the
right.
the questions. And again, it's a bad talk show host habit, but the thing that you mentioned about, the folks and the people that you're talking to and the guests that you have on the show, to you, what makes a good guest? Is it anybody? Is it, is it something you kind of know? I'm kind of I'll talk to anybody, and whether or not that program ever sees the light of day might be a different question, but
right.
I had a lot of conversations.
Well, I think us both having a radio background is the worst guests are the ones that answer yes, no answers, or or they have something like a monotone voice or some sort of annoying, like clicky habit of like constantly clearing their throat, where you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to spend hours editing this for maybe 2 minutes of gold, Outside of that, I think one of the beautiful things about Freemasons is most of them that I've met, they like to talk. So it's literally like hooking a bass and just opening up that reel and letting the line go. And once in a while, I got to pop it and lead them in a certain direction to get them to where they need to go. But for the most part, I think a lot of the guests is just, I always tell them, and I guess I'm giving away like secrets here, but before we start rolling, when I do our recordings, I say, hey, I do all the editing, I do all the production. So if you make a mistake, your wife walks in the room, your kids screaming, dog barking, whatever, we can just pause and I'll edit that out. And matter of fact, I'm probably going to be the one to make the first mistake just to let you know what it's like. And I always do. I screw up the intro somehow, and then we got to, recut it or whatever.
I literally give a similar speech saying, hey, if it wasn't for editing, I would have been fired a long time ago.
Yeah.
And then I later and say, hey, I want to get rid of this. I not a problem. We're all on the same team here. Let's.
Oh yeah. 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 And to that point as well, is like, I think as former hosts, like we just know when to get out of the way and when to insert us just enough. And, the funny thing for me is when you ask like, hey, why did you start this podcast? Well, one was because I was seeing a massive decline in our readership with our blog. And, today's man is busy. And we'll put out a great blog article and we'll push it out on social media. And this is what I love about Masons. You can put any picture about your lodge or Freemasonry, and your brothers are all going to thumb it up and love it and like it. And some of them might even share it or comment on it. But no one's actually reading the full article and being like, wow, that third paragraph and that point you made was just so profound. Like, that's amazing. And I took a step back and I'm like, the amount of time that we're actually really putting into writing and having an editorial process behind the scenes at Craftsman Online, I think it warrants now the idea of exploring a podcast. And the spoken word, I think, is so powerful for us. And you and I both know that the strength of radio was that it was companionship media. And it just doesn't really exist anymore in a world where it's endless streaming songs with some commercials that get thrown in there just for fun. And when you're passionate about something, you will sit there and listen to it. Like, one thing that turned me on was brothers that are like, hey, can you put your podcast on YouTube? Because I listen to podcasts on YouTube. And I was like, how do you listen? You just listen. Yeah, I have it on my other screen at work, and I'm working while listening to your podcast. I'm like, wow, never thought about that. I thought everybody listened on Apple Podcasts, you know?
It's crazy when you look at it. We started doing the same thing with Matt about a year ago. We started making sure the podcasts were double linked to YouTube, so that the platform we use to host our stuff does it pretty well automatically. We just have to click a couple of boxes, and it automatically uploads it to YouTube. It doesn't let us really mess too much with the. I don't know. What do you I didn't notice. What platform are you guys using to post things? We can cut this part out. This is insane.
Yeah. So we use Spreaker.
That's what we use.
Same exact thing. Yep.
I'm a ex iHeart employee. So, and it just pushes it out to everywhere. And then you learn little tricks along the way, like what, social media tricks do better or perform better. But honestly, the other reason why I started the podcast is, I tell all the guests this. I listen to the podcast every Monday when it comes out, when I go for my run around the neighborhood, and I wanted something I could listen to for 30 minutes at least that would entertain me. And I realized that when I was in New York and driving into work as an entered apprentice or a fellow craft, I would be seeking Masonic light, and RJ's Whence Came You podcast was one of the first ones that I started listening to. And I just found it so awesome and special that he was doing this. And it's a great honor to be accepted into that fraternity with your Masonic peers, with RJ and the brothers that do the Meet, Act, and Part podcast, and to be invited on the Tyler's Toast podcast. And to be included in the conversation is meaningful because we're all trying to do the same thing. I don't look at any of the other Masonic podcasts out there really as competition. It's just another way to try to share the same story.
100%. And I love RJ to death. He and I are ships passing in the night. We keep trying to get together on something, but between the two of us, we manage to be always busy all the time, so we can never get that together. But those guys, RJ, the Whence Came You guys, the Midnight Freemasons, all the different, as you mentioned, all of them. Yeah, I don't look at it as competition either, because since none of it is live, it's not an either or situation like it was. And again, we keep going back to the radio thing. It is a very different thing. You don't have to kill the guy who is across the hall from you because you guys are on at the exact same time and you're fighting for that moment. Listen to one podcast on Monday and another one on Tuesday, and there's plenty for everybody. So it allows that collaboration, and which is especially helpful when you're doing something that is about ultimately a brotherhood. We are able to work and enjoy each other's. One of my things, I just run out of time to listen to things, and then I am blessed in that I am a professional Freemason. I do, I get to work at the Scottish Rite. So there are some days when I'm like, I just do not want to talk about Masonry. and I'm good for today, and all that. So I'm a past master. There was a time there where I was like, okay, this is too much.
Right. Well, and that's always a fear too, because we know that some of the brothers who are our listeners also sit in lodge with us or have sat in lodge with us. They knew who we are behind the microphone, which is the same as when we were on the radio and people would know who you are because you're their neighbor or your kid goes to their school. And I've had to almost I better make sure I don't really say that and give too much detail out about an incident or a story, because, you got to be respectful of other people's identities, or you got to protect, their privacy. I did have a question. I have a couple questions for you.
Go for it, man. If I don't know the answer, I'll make something up.
Well, you've been doing this significantly longer than we have. We're only in 3 seasons, and I was listening to episodes you guys were doing back in 2017, 2016, and probably beyond. When you go back and listen to those old episodes, and you'd kind of mentioned they were 5 minutes, what do you hear now that you wish you could have, if you could travel back in time, that you would change, or would you just have left it the way that it is?
I like that it had those radio formatics because I do enjoy well-produced stuff. And I think that there is a lack of well-produced things in the podcast world. I don't mean Masonic podcasts. I mean, just in general. One of the podcasts, the non-Masonic podcasts that I listen to, and I realize they're just taking the audio from the TV show, is the Dateline NBC podcast, because it's very well produced. Wondery, which is a podcasting company, they also have some very well produced things. And I think that I really enjoy those things. It keeps you engaged. It uses the same tricks that television and broadcast radio have used to keep your attention span refocused. Very rarely do I sit down. I'll make no secret about the fact that I listen to Rogan. I think anybody who listens to podcasts at some point tunes into Rogan. You know, I listen to Jordan Peterson. I listen to a ton of different podcasts, and they have that. I love the conversational style, but it is rare for me to listen to the entire thing. I will listen to, as you mentioned, a half an hour, or, you know, if I've got a long commute or something like that. And then I will kind of move on, and maybe I'll come back to it, or maybe somebody will say, "Hey, did you hear this thing at the end of the podcast?" And I'll go forward to that. So I like that it was quick and engaging, but I ultimately enjoy having the conversations like we're having now a little more free form, and get to know somebody a little bit better, because I think that's where you get the most interesting conversations. As you mentioned astutely just a couple minutes ago, when you're listening to that podcast where they're having those deep conversations, you're waiting for that thing that they almost didn't plan on saying, but it came out and it was more interesting. And I think that's what I like now about the show a little bit more. But I certainly did enjoy the we had an announcer at the beginning and end. We had liners, and we didn't have any jingles. They wouldn't let me spend money on jingles. You know, we had the Tyler's Place podcast, and now I listen to it, and there's part of me that cringes, but part of me is like, all right, that's kind of cool.
Oh yeah. Well, a couple things on ours, like
podcast radio.
I used to have a little more fun in the production, where I would take a line that the brother would have said that would have got a laugh or a reaction out of me and moved it to the beginning and then rolled the intro. But over time, I was like, we're going to try to make this a little bit more serious. But the one thing that cringes me out in the early years for us was the production value. And if men listening only knew, and probably women too, that I was recording it on an ironing board in our guest bedroom on my son's old gaming microphone, because I didn't have the wherewithal yet, or really the commitment to get in and buy a podcasting microphone, a stand, the media interface, and get serious about it. Once you start to throw in the real money, that's when, the production value and everything starts to shoot up, and you really get serious about it. And once you have that conversation with your wife as to why you're putting money into something that she's realizing, hey, 3 times a night, 3 times a week, you're going to record these podcasts and you're spending all this money. And are you making any money on this? No, not one penny, not whatsoever. It's just what I do.
Yeah, it's costing us money. No, I get a little, I don't know what the right word is, not smug, but I get a little, I figure if I've got something I can record decent on, I can use I know the digital stuff. I don't know what you record on. I use Adobe Audition. I know how that tool works well enough that I can clean up most things. So if we're recording on an iPhone in a moving subway car, I can get it close enough. And sometimes I regret that, as I'm up until 2 a.m, editing pixel by pixel of something that I could have videoed or audioed a little bit better going in, but I just wanted to run and gun it. I do less of that now. I tend to be a little more prepared now than I once was, but I still surf the wave of chaos a little more often than I probably should. And I'm sure Matt, who's had to edit some of my stuff, probably wishes I was a little more careful.
Well, to add to that, on some of those things that some people might think have an enormously high production value, we got lucky. Yeah. Case in point was when back in February, when we did the live stream of the Washington National Masonic Memorial Parade. And you would have thought it was, because the stream quality was so good, we were literally standing next to a light post that was a 5G router.
Okay. Were you the guys that at the end of the finish line, you walked up and asked me?
Yep.
Oh, I was one of the people you walked. Okay.
Okay, cool.
I thought one of you looked familiar. I'm like, I remember somebody coming up and saying, where are you from? So a fun question. What has been the most powerful episode looking back on the whole catalog of your podcast? Which one has been the most powerful in that it connected you with the audience or with a guest?
That is a really great question. There are some that, unfortunately, there are a lot I have forgotten. We've done a couple hundred episodes at this point. I think there's one that stands out in my mind it was a statement that I kind of carry with me even now. It was past Grandmaster Roger Van Gordon, he was a past Grandmaster in, I want to say Indiana. Roger, I'm sorry, I know you're listening. He's now one of the heads of the Masonic Renewal Committee of the Conference of Grandmasters. Wonderful guy, wonderful friend and mentor. First time I interviewed him, we were in a hotel in Alexandria in the lobby having a cup of coffee, and I literally interviewed him on my phone, and he was frustrated with the state of Masonry in that people were dismissing men who he knew would be good leaders because they didn't memorize 30-minute lectures. And to me, in our fraternity today, we would dismiss George Washington as a leader because he didn't have time to memorize a 30-minute lecture. Think about that for a minute. And he's right. I'm a big believer in ritual is the easy part. Like, stop whining and memorize the lecture. Just shut up and memorize the lecture. Man up, memorize your ritual, and move on with your business. I know sometimes it's challenging. That's the truth. But you can do it. Just get it over and done with. Because if you're really going to be an effective leader of a lodge or of anything, the ritual and that part of it really is the easy part, because all you have to do is regurgitate it. It doesn't require any thought. It just requires simple muscle memory. And, I kind of carried that with me. The other one was just recently, I sat down for a very long time with past Grandmaster of Washington, D.C., Brother Akram Elias. And I've known Akram for a couple years now, and he's a wonderful guy. He showed up on the History Channel all the time. And, he's such a good speaker, but he really and truly is a true believer at the highest level of the power that Masonry has to unite and transform people. And it wasn't any one thing that he said in the interview. And again, it was only a couple of months ago, but it was just his entire approach to it just really struck me as, this is a guy who spent a good chunk of his life as a Freemason. He was a Grandmaster. He's dedicated so much of his life to it. And that one really got to me. And there's one I recorded just recently with my brother, Hank Griffin, and I call Hank the Garrison Keeler of Freemasonry. Hank's doing a podcast as well, but it's very different from what we're doing. He tells these homespun stories just like a Prairie Home Companion.
Nice.
Back to Freemasonry. And he's just gotten started in the last 3 or 4 months, and he is the Grand Chaplain in Maryland. And I didn't know him before this year, and I was having a tough time. Back in February, I was at a Masonic meeting. I got a phone call, got some bad news. And I went to Hank as the Grand Chaplain. I said, brother, I know you don't know me that well, but would you say a prayer with me? And I get choked up now, surprising to no one. But Hank and I are now really good buddies. And I sat down and talked to him. And Bowers, I'm going to give this to you to edit probably soon. About a month ago, it hasn't been released yet. It probably will in August or September. And Hank, talk about the real deal, the guy that walks the walk and talks the talk. Those are the recent ones. I'm sure there's more, but I've forgotten. So how about you? Is there one that gets you in the feels?
Yeah. It's weird living in this time where you can make connections like you have in person, which those are magical, special moments. But now, because of this technology and this world we live in, you can get an email from somebody, and that's literally where the friendship begins to blossom, right? And we had done a podcast on, to me, the title was the fun part, was Masonic intercourse and practicing safe Masonic intercourse. In New York State, that's how we refer to when it comes to interacting with clandestines that we're not supposed to be performing Masonic intercourse with them. And I've never seen a brother gone through the obligation that doesn't have a little smile on his face when that line comes out. But the brother that was the guest on the podcast, shared his story, which in all seriousness, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this happens. And what led to a brother who reached out to me and said, hey, I am a clandestine Mason, and I prefer to look at myself as an irregular Mason, and I want to become a regular Mason. Here's my story. Here's where I am. Can you help me? And Luis and I have become very close friends. He lives in Texas. I was trying to help him find a lodge. He eventually did find a lodge that he could affiliate with. They're having him go back all the way through all of the degrees, because he came from a jurisdiction in Mexico that was not recognized and didn't have amity with many Grand Lodges, but a lot of their ritual was so similar. And the difficult part was, wanting to have those conversations with him to find out where the differences are. But obviously those would be the secrets that we can't reveal even to people who really should be brothers, but they just joined a group that wasn't trying to take his money. They weren't doing the wrong thing. They just weren't recognized by other Grand Lodges, but for the way that they were, quote unquote, practicing Freemasonry. He's now an entered apprentice, so he's a Mason. I was so excited to, have a conversation with him, to get him on the podcast for an episode and just stay with him and track with him through his progress. But through all this time, which would literally started out with an email about 2 years ago, he's, had a daughter. He's gone through career changes. I've gone through career changes. I moved from upstate New York to DC. We've become like long distance friends. And to me, that's special. I don't remember really having those kind of relationships with radio listeners. It's something unique that we can do as Freemasons, and really kind of speaks to that brotherhood / fraternity aspect of the craft that sometimes goes overlooked.
When you look out over the horizon of Freemasonry, and there's the 30-foot question, what is the challenge, do you think, for us in the craft as we look out at the next, let's say, 5 years and then 10 years? What are the challenges that we really have in front of us to deal with?
I think the immediate challenge that we have right now, and like no joke, but we have to be better than Netflix.
It's a good point. We got a lot of. I had a phone call with a guy who is the current. What's Greg? He's a senior steward in our lodge there, Matt.
Greg Otto, yes.
So Greg calls me and he goes, man, I'm listening to this audiobook, and these guys, he was listening to the Hey Dad audiobook, which is the audiobook Matt just did for the DMLA about Frank Land. And excellent audiobook, by the way, if you want to listen to it, The Golden Tones of Matt Bowers. And he goes, man, I'm listening to this, and these guys, they went and they got entered, passed, and raised, and they did it all within like 3 weeks. How the heck did they do that? And I was like, yeah, they didn't have Netflix. And, I think I actually said an adult website. I said they didn't have any of that to contend with. So they didn't have anything else to do. So
right.
And it's the truth. You're right. That's 100%. We got to be better than Netflix. So
yeah, I remember sitting in lodge recently and going, why am I spending a Friday night sitting in here for a business meeting? Like, I could be home with my wife watching a Netflix show right now. As much as that's boring and sucked like 3 years ago during the pandemic, I'm like, I don't have to be dressed up in a tuxedo. And I think that that's the immediate challenge that we have, is getting past the boring business meetings. I don't see the membership decline as a critical issue. I do think the consolidation that's eventually going to have to happen, with many lodges coming back down to what is a reasonable size. I personally hold the opinion that Freemasonry is not right for every man, just like every man's not right to be a Freemason. I give this talk at every Brother Bring a Friend night. I say, look across this room. How many of us are sitting here? There's like 12 or 13, right? How many men do you know in your life? And how come you're the one that's in this room and more of the people you know aren't? It's a small circle. And then I think just, all of we also are living in a time where we feel that the problems that we face are so unique, and it's not. There's actually been harder times in the history of the world than where we are right now. And when it comes to defending the craft, for lack of a better term, and promoting the goodness of the craft, we were facing the same problems that our brothers did in the 18th century with the advent of the printing press and the pamphlets and the exposés and trying to shout down all the detractors. So really, I think that the issue that we have right now are more self-inflicted problems, so to speak, where we have men who are turning to the internet and a Google search to find a lodge and get there, and we just don't know how to bring them on the boat, so to speak, from being caught in the ocean.
Well, I think one of the big things that we face, and having gotten to the privilege of working with the Northern Masonic jurisdiction and the Shrine, and of course the Southern jurisdiction, the Scottish Rite, on the Be a Freemason project, is that what happens is that we get these inquiries, for lack of a better word, that, I'm interested in joining a lodge, I'm interested in Freemasonry. And then we send them to the local lodges, and the ball gets dropped. And it's easy to get frustrated by that. But I as a lodge secretary now, and a past master, and having sat in every chair and all that, it's a volunteer army. And so, right now, tonight, you and I are doing this out of the love for the craft. And because another brother doesn't have the time to do this, doesn't mean that he doesn't love the craft, but maybe he just doesn't have the time. And maybe the lodge secretary is dealing with 15 other things, and somebody's not hand walking a petition into him and saying, here's the petition, here's the check. You're just getting an email with a name and an email address on it. I can tell you right now, as busy as you get, sometimes that goes to the bottom of the stack. And it's unfortunate, but it's not done out of malice. It's just, it is what it is. We're
right.
Very few men get paid to do this. It's you have a finite amount of time in your day. And so do I tell my wife I can't have dinner with her tonight because I'm instead going to go and answer these 50 emails? That's just, in most cases, that's not going to happen.
And the other issue to that is that when do you get a chance during a Masonic meeting to say, oh, by the way, I'm a certified digital marketing specialist, or, hey, by the way, I have a CPA, or I have a law degree. Like, when do you really get a chance to share your portfolio, your skills, your talents with the other brothers? That all happens in outside of the lodge events. And if we're not having those, then you really don't see the talent that's waiting for you. And I think a lot of that is being missed in the craft too. So, yeah, like I said, I think a lot of the issues that we're having is just organizational. It's not the outside world. It's us just trying to find a way to transform, to be more efficient, and be able to provide, to retain the people that we have, and still have an onboarding process, a smoother process, a better defined process for those that are interested in joining us.
Now, you are a senior warden currently. Do you intend to take the East next year, or are you going to wait another year? Well, how are you going to handle it?
Well, this is my second time getting to be a senior warden.
That's a nervous laugh.
Yeah, no, I laugh because depending on when this podcast gets released, here in DC, you have to take your section, I think it's like section 82 or 80. You have to be able to open and close a lodge on all 3 degrees and know, I think, the purge. And the biggest challenge that I have is that I had an excellent Masonic mentor in New York who beat that New York ritual into my head. And it's so hard to try to learn, another jurisdiction. So that's really the only hiccup that I have as far as going into like a leadership role. I mean, I've been sitting here for 8 years thinking about what I would get to do if I had the honor of serving my brothers. And I'm definitely coming at it with more of a corporate mindset, in that our lodge next year at St. John's, our whole year is going to be built around the experience of the one individual brother. And what can we do as a lodge to try to create an interest for people that are literally walking by? We meet at the Alma Shrine in downtown DC on Friday nights. What is it that we can do that's literally going to bring people in the door and want to be around us? What
Friday nights do you meet? I'm going to come pop into your lodge some night.
First Friday of the month. Please come down. I'd be happy to bring in.
That'd be awesome. I'm in Maryland. The lift is a little heavier than that. You have to open and close in all 3 degrees, do all the master's work for all 3 degrees, and do the lectures for all 3 degrees. The master has to do all of that. And you have to certify and all that. You got 2 years to do it. Usually by the time you're a junior warden, you should be starting on it. The first time I became master of a lodge, I was hoodwinked because they'd opened a lodge at my shrine. I was the senior deacon at my mother lodge, and they opened a new lodge in our shrine. And the goal was that, men would come into this blue lodge, and then they would immediately join the shrine. And I was a Shriner, and I lived really close to that shrine. And they I said, hey, do you want to be an officer? And I said, yeah, sure. Just make me the senior deacon. That way it's the same job in both places. No new ritual. I'll just carry on. And then when the time comes to decide, because in Maryland, you can only hold one elected office at a time. We'll make a decision in a year or two. And so what had happened was the guy who they had picked to be the senior warden the night before the lodge was to be chartered, he dropped down and said, nah, I can't do it after all. And so the man who was the master, who was also the potentate of the shrine at the time, came and goes, oh, by the way, so-and-so dropped out, so I'm going to make you senior warden now. So I'll see you tomorrow night. I was like, what? I don't, so it at that point, I just kind of had to, put up or shut up in doing it. And so I did. And that was my first round as a worshipful master in a small lodge. And then 2 years later, following the death of our sitting worshipful master, I was his senior warden, very, very dear friend, Ed Spellman. He passed, and I took over for him and then stayed in the East at the tail end of COVID in 21 and in 22. And, honestly, once I got the ritual in my head, that really became the easy part. It was all the other things that were, it's always somebody mad about something.
The flare-ups, so to speak.
Well, the Eastern Star is upset about this, and this group is upset. It's like, for God's sake, I just want to come in here, make Masons, and meet some new brothers, have a hot dog, and go home. But such is not the case. But it's honestly, it's the best job I ever had. I miss being master of the lodge every single day.
I haven't gotten to do that chair yet. My favorite chair so far has been senior deacon. In New York, it has a little bit more of an expanded role, but I really enjoyed, I think that's where I did the most learning, when you actually get to conduct the candidates around for the degrees and you're really paying attention. It really starts to click together all of that catechism study that you did, and now you're understanding it.
Well, and that's the part that separates the men's from the boys in terms of ritual, because that, at least in Maryland, and I think in a lot of other places, the senior deacon, as you said, does the circumambulations, but he also is the guy that does the second degree winding staircase lecture. And that is one of the most, I find, powerful points of our ritual. And when you do that for the first time with some candidates and you're playing with live ammunition, that's a really cool feeling. So I like that, but there's not a day goes by that I don't like, there's something about knowing that you've got the control of the ship. It's a really cool thing, and to have the trust and the faith of the men in your lodge is a good thing. When things are going well, when things are going bad, it sucks. It's the worst job.
Well, to me, I think we could leave this in. I'm fine with saying it, but my least favorite chair that I've sat in, only because I've sat in it 3 times, is junior warden, and not because of the lodge duties of the junior warden. I would want to strangle guys because they couldn't make a simple dinner reservation, and you just don't know how much food or drink you need to provide. And that used to drive me absolutely crazy.
Nobody RSVPs.
Yeah, no. And it just, they're so sweet, and they're your brother, and you can't strangle them, but you want to, and you just wish that they would have done that. So another podcast question for you. Sure. What's the one topic that you've always wanted to discuss, but maybe for some reason you can't, or you just haven't had the opportunity to bring it up?
I will tell you, I'm discussing it on, we're in the middle of a sea change, sort of. The podcast, we started doing the YouTube channel, which is very personality driven, and it's a lot of fun, but it's also an incredible amount of work. And what I have found is that the public's curiosity for Masonry is equal to the craft's curiosity for Masonry. There's so many misconceptions and things out there. I have stayed away from discussions of the topic of Albert Pike, and specifically his statement on Lucifer that everybody misconstrues and takes out of context. And just today, I recorded a segment that will be part podcast, part YouTube video with Dr. Brent Morris. And Brent, he does a talk on Leo Taxiel and the Taxiel hoax and how it plays into Pike and the statement on Lucifer and things like that. And so I've stayed away from it because I can't resist feeding the trolls, and I have to stop. I need Matt and Brother Dean Albin they try their hardest to whisper good counsel and tell me to stop, but people post things and I just need to delete it and move on with my day. But I feel this, I don't even know what the right word is.
It's an urge.
It is. I cannot. It's like I can't leave that one.
Addiction.
I can't leave that last cookie in there. I gotta finish it. And
would it be a vice or a superfluity? Which one do you think it falls under? That category?
I think it's super stupidity is what it is. Like I know, like there's this guy right now who's just as we were starting this discussion tonight. He's, you guys are Luciferian. You're this, you're that, and it's like how many times I've typed out these very long responses about how Lucifer's not even really in the Bible, and it's the whole.
Actually, you had one the other day that was pretty short and sweet and to the point.
Which one was that?
Remember which one that was?
I do. You have no idea how often.
Well, no, you shared it. I think you texted it to me. You were like, "You're a Satanist, you're a child molester, and you're this," and I'm like, "Wow,
okay. That guy. Yeah. Okay. You're a pedophile and a Satanist, and like Satanist was worse than the way he ranked it. Like Satanist was worse than pedophile, and I was like, no, pedophile." I've stayed away from it because I know that what's going to happen is it's going to blow up and people are going to comment, and I can't. I gotta. I don't know if I need self-hypnosis or get a rubber band to snap every time I feel like responding, but because it's just so stupid. Like it's just so very stupid. I can't. You're going to see it, and it's embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. I'm very honest. I'm embarrassed that I let it get to me, but it just eats me up. And we're approaching 1 million views on our YouTube channel, which I'm really proud of. And I'm deliberately titling things to get people to click on them. And then I get agitated that they have stupid, like I'm literally asking for this. I'm going to enter some sort of podcast, YouTube 12-step program to not feed the trolls. That's the one thing. Another thing is I think that sometimes we do have to be careful not to talk about certain topics because it might upset a particular Grand Lodge or Grand Master. And that's certainly not our goal with the Tyler's Place podcast, is to upset. I know there are podcasts out there that like to rattle cages. I don't really think that's my role in terms of doing things. We're more, this sounds wishy-washy, but we're sort of a boosters club. We want to be uplifting. We want to be positive about the craft. What about you? Is there some you have? What do you not want to talk about?
Well, I mean, there's the one thing I've always wanted to discuss on the podcast, and again, kind of going back to how I'm envious of Rogan and how he can just talk about anything with the whole free speech. And maybe it would be the last podcast I ever did, because if I talked about the secrets of Freemasonry, I'm pretty sure that would get me kicked right out of the club. But I just have always wanted to have that discussion because I feel that is the part of the experience that's so unique. And the toughest part is like when you're sitting here and you're really engaging with a guest, sometimes you forget, like, oh my gosh, yeah, we're doing a podcast that anyone anywhere in the world can listen to. So I forgot that I have to be guarded with the words that I choose and how I talk about things. But you would think that like on a Masonic podcast, just like you would think like in a Masonic lodge, that's the one place you could talk about these things, and you should be able to talk about these things, but we can't, at least on the podcast. So we have to leave some conversations that happen in a lodge. But it's getting right up to that line, and then you just kind of leave them in it. It's the old entertainer. We're not purposely teasing you, leaving you wanting more. I'm trying to set you into a place where it's not very hard for you to get to the next step and find where you need to go to get that answer. But I think that that's the one part of our initiation experience and just going through the fraternity and being obligated. And it's the one thing I always ask the brothers immediately after they take the first degree, once they become passed to a fellow craft and raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason, like, okay, what's the one takeaway? What's the one thing that's happening in your mind right now? Go tell me. And then let's just talk about that for like 10 or 15 minutes and like really get into it before all these other thoughts just start exploding out of your head like a 4th of July fireworks show.
When you hear the word, the secrets of Freemasonry, what does that evoke to you? And I don't mean to discuss specifically. I mean, I'm of the opinion that there are very few secrets, and I hate the word secrets of Freemasonry. I think it's misplaced. I prefer the term private, and I've talked about this in the past is that when you are in the bathroom, what's happening is not really a secret. We all kind of know, but it's private.
Right.
When you are alone with your wife, your partner, whatever, what's happening in your bedroom is not really a secret, but it's private. I think Freemasonry is much the same way. There is that private initiatory experience, and there are some things that we kind of keep between members and brothers, but it's not secret. There's nothing nefarious about it. And I think the word secret, even though it has many definitions, and the old definition is the one that we're really using when we say the secrets of Freemasonry, I think in a modern context, it does give that nefarious connotation. So I try and avoid it. I don't think we're a secret society. So do you look at Masonry as inherently a secret society?
No, to kind of build on that, like, so the other line is, oh, we're a society with secrets, though. And I'm with you. Like, the secrets are no longer the passwords, the grips. You can look all that stuff up. Hell, I did. I read everything I could about all of the degrees before I went and even took them. I wouldn't say that I was minimally surprised, because there is a lot of that whole experience that you're still having nervous sweats and freaking out about, because you're like, wait a second, this wasn't in this Duncan's Ritual book that I just spent $7 on Amazon for, that was supposed to have all the secrets from these guys. This wasn't in that History Channel expose that I watch where they talk about the secrets of the degree. I'm with you, where I think the true meaning of the word secrets is really the unknown. It's the parts of the ritual that, and this is, I kind of gravitate over into the dark corners with the esoteric guys, where they're like, well, hey, did you know that the chakra? And you're like, wait, where did you get this chakra thing? Because nowhere in this ritual book that I've been given did we talk about this at all. Like, where did you guys get? But I think it's that, and not to bust on them, but I'm just saying that I think that the secrets are the search for those unknowns. It's the reading between the lines. It's what do these words really mean? It's one thing that, I've talked a lot about on our podcast is I probably stopped reading the Bible when I was in 5th grade, because I stopped going to church with my parents. And now I'm actually buying, I'm looking at it now, Roget's Thesaurus of the Bible. So I can go and look for certain words, because now they have a deeper meaning as a Mason. So I think that the secrets are our pursuit or our testing of the theories of the unknown. And the danger is that, just like our friend Joe Rogan, somebody's going to say something that's going to be pretty close to being right, and that's going to freak a lot of people out. And that's why it's a secret.
To me, the secret, it's less about a something that we're hiding from people, and more about something that is, what's the word? Gosh, I can't think of the invaluable. It's that space between brothers, that bond that exists, that invisible bond that forms between two people who would have otherwise never met one another. And some of my best buddies in the world, Matt and I, we were friends before we were Masons for many, many years, and we worked together as in a band for a long, long time, and he became a Mason from that. It wasn't me who asked him, by the way, or who said, "Hey, are you thinking about joining a lodge?" That was my one brother, Pete, and Pete passed away last year. And there is that connection between myself and Pete, this guy who I would have never known. And, had it not been for my relationship with Pete, Matt would have never known him. And it's like, there's this invisible thread and that's the secret. And I don't mean that like, the 11 herbs and spices. There's this uncommunicable thing that I can't tell you what that connection between us is, but there is something there. I can't put my hand on it. I couldn't even define it, but it's beyond being friends. And we're certainly not related by blood, but we are 100% brothers. And that bond is not, so that's the secret of Masonry. And you can tell people that all you want, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you're a Mason who has one of those relationships who's really, kind of gotten into it. And I always hate when people say, "Oh, you get into it you get out of it what you put into it." But the truth is that you really do. If you give yourself into this a little bit, and I have to say, watching Matt, old Mr. Bowers can be a little bit of a curmudgeon in life. And, but seeing him with the men who he came through his catechism class with, and seeing those friendships form from complete strangers to now guys that he talks to on a pretty much daily basis, is a really kind of a cool thing to watch from this perspective. And, I know it's impacted his life as a human being. I know, his wife is even saying, God, sometimes Matt's like a whole different person. I'm like, yeah, he's even less likable now than he always was. But, it's kind of a really neat thing to see. And I think that's the secret of Freemasonry, but it's not a secret. It's a remarkable thing. I really think when you really let the brotherhood become a part of your life. And I think that more men need to do it in general. And I think more Masons need to do it in general. Just, sometimes people come in and they sit on the sideline and they don't take that next step to be active in their Masonic journey. I mentioned, I think of Masonry as being something that should be very practical in a man's life. One of the first lessons you have to learn is that you have to ask to be a Mason. And I think that lesson is one of Masonry and life being a proactive team sport. You have to step forward and say, I'm ready, coach. Let's do something. Don't walk in and sit on the sideline. Walk in and say, hey, where can I help? What can I do? Where can I be a part of this? And that's hard for some guys to do that. Not every man can walk in and do that. I get that. But I think it's a lesson that really most Masons should learn. So, what does the future hold for you guys, for the podcast, for you? I'm going to be on you now. You need to be the master of the lodge. You need a top hat, brother.
Right. I've actually been thinking about that. I think what spurs me along is our friend Robert Johnson, RJ, and he's like, I just did my, what is it? Is he up to like 800 or it's almost up to his 1000th episode? And I'm like,
yeah, he's the OG.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here going, math is not my strength, but so if there's 52 weeks in a year, that's a 52-week season and 1,000. Oh, I'll be doing this for a while to hit that mark. I don't know. What's made it special is the leaps and bounds that we've been able to grow. And so I would want to thank, at this point, the brothers that have helped us get from the ground floor to where we are now. One brother who's meant a lot to us as a reoccurring guest, a defending champion, so to speak, Brother John Nagy. He's been fantastic throughout the years coming on and just shedding his wisdom and insight. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't say big thanks to Brother Nicholas Broadway from the Square magazine in the UK. And we connected and have done a couple episodes together. And he's just a great promoter and friend of the podcast. And to all the other guests who have come on and have just, shared their light, like that's what's made the growth so amazing. So yeah, for me, I think eventually I would love to get to a place where maybe our podcast had more of kind of a staff, like a daily. I'm a big fan of the daily, the New York Times podcast, where other people can now rotate. It's not just the same host all the time, and brothers can go out and maybe present more of that storytelling / assignment / documentary feel of an episode with the conversational Q&A or guests talking about something format that seems to be working as well. So yeah, to me, I'm an open book. As long as people are listening and brothers keep reaching out, we'll keep trying to provide something every Monday morning for them.
Yeah. And I've only did the Tyler's Place ever as a monthly. Occasionally we'll do a bonus. And that was, that was the Supreme Council. They wanted, when they approached about doing the podcast in general, they said,
well, Maynard, I'll cut it up and we'll do a half a year. You can jump on right now. Hey, you're looking to jump on.
Yeah, we were, but Matt has come on and my job is not solely podcasting. So I do a lot of the engagement stuff. And so, content creation, as takes so much time to, we're doing these YouTube videos now, and it sort of exploded on us. We fell, pardon the term, we fell ass backwards into it. We had a YouTube channel and it just had some random little videos on it. But in 2020, Dan Brown came to us and said, hey, we're going to be doing this TV show. It was 2019, going to be doing this TV show of The Lost Symbol, the book where it takes place inside the house of the temple. You guys should do some behind the scenes stuff with us when we do it. And we were all in for that. And then COVID came, and it turned out they didn't get to film in Washington, D.C. They had to rebuild the House of the Temple in Vancouver and sequester the whole staff and everything like that. And so we ended up giving them some high-res photos with which they could recreate the House of the Temple, and they did a pretty nice job. And in exchange, they gave us access to the video, and they said, why don't you guys do like a behind-the-scenes type of thing? So what we did is we had just planned to do 10 videos of, okay, here's what happened in this episode. Yes, this is a legitimate Masonic symbol, or no, they just made this up completely, or, here's a little bit of a mix of where, okay, this is a real Masonic symbol, but it really means this. And they said, and we were going to just do that. And it blew up so quickly on us that, and I really thought it would be non-Masons who would dial in and say, that we're curious about the craft, and we could kind of set them straight. But what we found out is that there was a real desire among Masons to have an approachable discussion of Masonic symbolism. As we've talked about earlier in this discussion, sometimes the guys who are of the esoteric mind, they get so far down the rabbit hole that it ceases to be approachable for either the new Mason or the guy who just wants to be better tomorrow than he was today. He doesn't want to know what Albert Pike had for lunch on the third Thursday in 1870 when he finished writing Morals and Dogma. He just wants to get a little bit of wisdom and move on with his day. And there was such a demand for it, we kept doing it, and it has blown up. So now that has become the weekly challenge. And the podcasting, Brother Bowers took over doing the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, which has just exploded under his tutelage. I'm probably going to end up handing the reins of the Tyler's Place off to him sometime either later this year or the first part of next year. We'll be able to expand some of that. But it's for us, the challenge has never been about the content, but it's always been about finding the time to do all the different things that we're doing, because we're doing, the journal and this podcast and that and this video and Master Craftsman and all these other things. And oh yeah, we're restoring Masons and bringing them back from NPD and things like that. So it all falls under our umbrella. It's a wonderful challenge, and we're really blessed to be able to do it. But it does sometimes cut into the amount of time you can spend recording and writing things.
Yeah, I hear you. What's a wish list guest? Who's one person you wish you could get on the podcast?
I'm working on that.
Yeah, we've got, there's a
I'm working on one of them.
Yeah, John Petrucci, who's a guitar player for Dream Theater. There are a couple of Dream Theater songs that appear to have Scottish Rite influence, and so we'd like to get from the horse's mouth whether or not that's true. I'd love to talk to Bob Dylan. I don't think most people even realize he's a Scottish Rite Mason, but I would love to talk to him. I don't know what state he's in at this moment in time in terms of his mental capacity. One minute I read that he's still sharp as a tack, and the next minute I read that he's having some difficulties. I mean, he's 81 maybe. So love to chat with him. I'd love to talk to some more Prince Hall brothers. Our Grand Commander Cole, wonderful guy to work for and work with. He brought all four of the Grand Commanders in Northern Masonic jurisdiction and both Prince Hall Grand Commanders to the House of the Temple last September for a statement of unity, where basically saying Prince Hall, Scottish Rite, we're all brothers, and we love and embrace each other. And I thought that was really cool, and I really want to get some more of them to join us and have those. So those are some of the basic ones. But how about you, wish list guest?
Well, I would need Doc Brown's time machine.
Right.
I'd want to grab Preston and Webb and bring them together and just be like, dudes, these lectures that you wrote that are now part of our ritual, like, what does really all this mean? Where did you get the inspiration for this? What are you really trying to tell us for people that have really studied it? Because all we have now is kind of their works and their writings that they've made on it. But yeah, if I could travel back in time and have a discussion, 30 minutes would seem like a lifetime.
Yeah, if I were in the DeLorean and me and Marty ended up somewhere, I would go see Brother Pike, and it'd be like, do not write that sentence. Not write that sentence. Right. Not write about Lucifer, write about something else. Put your pen down. Don't write about that.
Right.
You have no idea how much aggravation that has caused. I would do that. Well, I got into Masonry because of Washington. When I got done being a radio host, I thought, well, my next step will be run for public office or something like that. And I didn't get to go to college as a younger man. So I thought, well, I need some kind of leadership training. And it looks like Masonry, a lot of great leaders came from that. So, and Washington's the guy. So, obviously a few minutes with George, I'd like to talk to Ben, but I feel like he'd be drinking and there'd be a lot of women around. So
yeah. Those Revolutionary era brothers, because I think the charges that we read now, especially the ones that talk about being a good citizen and not uprising against that was a byproduct of what happened with the American Revolution. But I would love to hear, that thought of okay, so first of all, you were a citizen. Well, it wasn't even a country. You were under the crown. And then what were you thinking? In that you were able to pull all this off. We just had brother Kenneth Joel Ginn, who's the master of St. John's #1 in New York City with the Washington Inaugural Bible. And he was kind of painting the picture of what that first inauguration for Washington was like. And the two other men that were on the balcony that were there administering the first ever oath of office were Freemasons. And kind of going to your point about some of the Dan Brown or conspiracy theory, what's up with these Freemasons and their secrets? It's well, once you understand how good Freemasonry is, wouldn't you want to surround yourself with a bunch of people that are also part of this group that you can trust? I wish there were more of us that we could kind of bring into that picture.
How do you think and I know we got to wrap this up here before too long. How do you think we combat the trolls without doing the stupid thing that I do, which is engaging with each and every one of them? And I feel like there's always some that I could say. If I just make this one more point, he'll believe me, even though I know that. But how do we combat the misconceptions that we are facing in the world? Right.
I just ignore them, honestly. I learned a long time ago. This is before I was even a Freemason.
You're smart. I'm not.
No. I just, I kind of have 3 rules in life. And rule number 1 is I just don't argue with stupid people, because you're never going to win. They're just going to beat it out of you. And you're just going to. So, and fortunately, I have not. And please don't send them my way. I've had limited interaction with these haters, these detractors. And I think of one actually one time, no, I'll take that back. I was in San Diego. I was at a bar. A guy spotted me. I was outside having a drink and a smoke, and he came up and he saw my Masonic ring and started getting into the whole blah, 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 blah. And I just looked at him and I'm like, where are you getting this information from? I mean, I've never heard any of this before. This is fantastic. This is so colorful. It's so interesting. And, thank you for sharing that. And, have a great night, guy. And just, he parted ways. I commend you for wanting to try to instill some light into these poor folks that just feel like if they just cast another rock, they're going to be the one to try to knock down this tower. But it's just not going to happen for them. But yeah.
And in my brain, I know it too, but in my heart, there's this, I can save them. I can fix this person.
It's the ones that don't say anything that I'm most concerned about. Because, the crazy ones that, have their conspiracy theories and whatnot. It's the ones that when you tell people, hey, I'm a Freemason, or you don't feel comfortable sharing that information with somebody, and they're like, oh, and it's everybody else gives you my grandfather or my uncle or my father or some other, man that was important in my life and my family was a Mason. They're good people. It's oh, you're a Freemason. It's oh, did I offend you with something that I said? Those are the people that I'm always worried about, that we could be doing more when it comes to just Masonic PR, visible PR with our Grand Lodges and our lodges and all the jurisdictions, of just letting people know the wonderful amount of charity, the difference that we make in the community, that we are in the community that they live in, where those guys that if Freemasonry didn't exist, we'd still be those quiet men behind the scenes that see something that needs to be done, and we do the work to fill the need.
That's Brother Michael Arce from the Craftsman Online Podcast. Please take a moment, subscribe to their podcast. It is a very well-produced weekly show. I know that you will enjoy it, and the links are in the description for this episode of the Tyler's Place, or of course, Google is always your friend. Just search Craftsman Online Podcast, and it will come right up. Special thanks to Matt Bowers, host of the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, who helped pull all this together. Speaking of fellow podcasters, make sure you subscribe to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast every single week. An article from the Scottish Rite Journal is brought to you so that you can listen to it while you're mowing the lawn or whatever. Who's got time to read sometimes? I know I run out of hours in a day. So listen to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast and you will be all set. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd Degree. We will catch you next time right here on the Tyler's Place podcast.